Louise Porton is who I'm going to cover. She was born in 1997, so she's a young person. She had 2 siblings, and to all intents and purposes, when you look at the family history, it was a close-knit family. She also had a very violent streak as a child. She was somebody who people were wary of. Her cousin, well, she described the fact that Louise would viciously attack family members. And what she would do was to basically try to hurt the children particularly, but without people noticing. From 11 years of age, there's another disturbing feature, and that's that she starts stealing from her grandmother. And I would also imagine that at 11, when her mum leaves, that's an instrumental trigger in the decline that we see in Louise Porton's behaviour. Another thing that seems to change in Louise Porton's behaviour is the way that she starts to experience the opposite sex. So as she starts to get older, she becomes highly promiscuous, and it's noted that she would sleep with anyone who showed her attention. That's important because if you feel a level of abandonment, then you'll seek validation. And if you have incredibly low self-worth, sometimes it's even hard to value anything around you or within your world because you don't really value anything you do. What we see with Louise Porton is that she realises there is an opportunity to use that type of behaviour to gain money. Porton becomes a young mum. So she has a child at a relatively young age. She gives birth to her first child, Lexi Draper, when she's 18, which is going to be challenging. So by August 2016, she's living in Skiddaw in Rugby. She's in council housing, and she's a single parent and mother of 2, in fact, by that point. So she has 3-year-old Lexi, and she also has 16-month-old Scarlett Vaughan. In spite of the fact that Louise Porton does have a man who's obviously got involved to some degree, he's called Chris Draper, he's not allowed to see his kids. He'd never even met Scarlett. So now Louise Porton is living with her 2 children. As I said, she's alienated from her ex who she's had children to, and she's basically describing herself at this point as a part-time model, which is a fancy word in her world for being a worker. So she would offer men that she met online nude photographs for cash. She'd offer them for cash. From August 2016, this is until November 2017, early November, Porton lives at an address in Willenhall, which is near Walsall. And it's here that a landlady who she's living under basically spends miles more time caring for her kids. She's quite happy to go out and socialise and do whatever without her kids being around. Now, according to people who knew her, they said that she was literally out clubbing the moment she got an opportunity. Now, on the 2nd of January 2018, Porton calls the emergency services, and what she says is that Lexi was experiencing breathing problems, which is obviously scary for any of us parents who've been through that. And Porton said that what she actually thought was that she'd suffered a fit. The ambulance obviously gets arranged, but then she calls back and she actually cancels the ambulance. She says she's got transport. Now, at this point, that sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? I mean, to any of you who've ever had to call emergency services, if you've got someone who can drive you there quickly, then you're avoiding having to wait. So as a worried parent, you're probably going to take advantage of that. She then takes Lexi to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, just think where you'd be. Your kid's got breathing difficulties, you're that concerned, you're taking them to A&E. Porton is actually messaging someone about photos of a sexual nature and also how much money was going to be involved. And when they get to the hospital, the doctors obviously examine Lexi and they're really perplexed. Ultimately, they can't figure out what has happened, so they diagnose a chest infection and they prescribe her antibiotics. There's nothing that's really standing out to them that makes them think that there's anything potentially sinister going on. However, 2 days later, so just 2 days later, this is the 4th of January 2018, she calls emergency services. Again, now at this point, she says that Lexi's had a fit. Paramedics then arrive at Porton's bedsit. At this point, Lexi is actually in a really critical condition. She's lay on her back, she's flat, she's in a deep state of unconsciousness, and if it had not been for the resuscitation skills of the paramedics who were there is no way that she would survive. The paramedic who later testified in court, well, they said that he had absolutely no idea why the child was as ill as she was, and all he could conclude at the time was that maybe she could have been suffering from some severe respiratory illness. But again, we're getting introduced to this sudden onset of something without anything that's really significant for them to note. Louise Porton is noted by the paramedics at this point that she's apparently upset, but they're not noting that she's being hysterical or panicky or desperate. And when she gets in the ambulance, when they're taking her daughter to hospital, they noted that she wasn't distressed at all. The doctors again examine the child, and they are again very perplexed. Lexi is in a critical condition, but they can't figure out what's provoked it. They are not at all suspicious, by the way, at this point. The doctors then prescribe her some more antibiotics because clearly they think that she might be needing to fight something, an infection. Now, whilst Lexi is actually getting treated in the hospital, Porton goes to the toilet, and I know what you're thinking, breaks down, sobs, has to be escorted out on a trolley, given oxygen, and told it's all going to be fine, before selflessly promising that she will never leave her child again. Yes, that's what you'd expect, but no, Louise Porton goes to the toilets and just takes topless photos of herself. She's like, my kid's nearly died. How shall I handle this? I'll just get my boobs out and send some topless photos to some random guy. Yeah, that literally happened. The 14th of January 2018, and bear in mind we've had this little girl now twice very unwell in a short amount of time. So earlier in the day, on that day, CCTV at Porton's block of flats shows her entering with her kids. Now Lexi and Scarlett appear fit and well. Simple as that. They look absolutely fine. There is nothing that introduces you to either of those children being in pain or unhappy or restless. They're not crying. They're certainly not walking around like they're struggling. So we are not introduced to any concerning behaviour at this point. The kids look well. However, in spite of that CCTV showing them that they're well, Porton contacts the emergency services about Lexi shortly before 1 a.m. on the 15th of January. So again, she's in contact with the hospital. The call handler inquires about the condition that her daughter's in.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
No.
They're not breathing?
No.
Okay. And who was it we're talking about?
Lexi, she's 3.
She's 3?
Yeah.
Okay. So she's unconscious and she's not breathing. So help has been arranged, okay?
So when the paramedics reach Lexi, they examine her and there's literally nothing they can do at all. She's totally beyond saving, and she'd been dead for quite a long time. So her skin was pale, it was mottled, her lips were blue, and rigor mortis had actually already started to set in. When they do the initial post-mortem, they actually can't find any obvious cause of death, but it's not outside the realms of possibility for it to happen. So Louise acts upset initially. She suddenly seems to get back on with herself. So the day after Lexi's died, she accepts 41 friend requests on the dating app Meet Me. She's also just messaging men on the dating social network Badoo. Yeah, just having a chat, as you would. And at this point, she's chatting about a leg tattoo. And at this point, she just throws into the conversation, my little girl passed away yesterday. He then says, I'm really sorry. And she replied, it's all right. If that wasn't bad enough, she even arranges to go on a date with a man called Leon that night. And when a friend actually asks about Lexi's death, Louise Porton, who you would imagine would just be writhing in agony dealing with the grief, she says in a jokey voice, "I had 2, now down to 1." Now, at the end of January 2018, Porton goes to stay in a hotel and she takes Scarlett with her. On the 1st of February 2018, bear in mind this is just 17 days after Lexi's death, CCTV shows Porton leaving the hotel and she's carrying Scarlett to her car. She later, by the way, claims that she did this because her daughter had become unwell. She wanted to get her checked over. And while she's going to the hospital to apparently get her checked over, Porton pulls over into a car park at Elliott's Retail Park in Rugby, and at this point she calls an ambulance. She dials 111, and at this point she claims that her daughter's condition basically doesn't seem too serious, which again is strange because if you're dialing 111, yes, ultimately you wouldn't necessarily think there was something terrible about to happen, but if you're in the car driving to the hospital, why wouldn't you just carry on going? I mean, it seems like you're on the way there. Why would you add minutes to the journey? She tells the operator that her daughter's asleep in the child's seat. The operator then says, "Well, try and wake her." She tries to wake her and then she says she couldn't. She then tells the operator that Scarlett has stopped breathing and paramedics are sent out. They get to Scarlett 9 minutes later, and basically, much like with her sister, there is nothing that they can do to save this gorgeous little girl. She's completely lifeless. There's evidence that she'd been dead for some time. She's officially pronounced dead 35 minutes later at University Hospital in Coventry. Bear in mind, Louise Porton has now lost 2 children in a very short space of time. How would you be? But apparently she's just cold, calm and emotionless following Scarlett's death. And what she tells the staff at the hospital is that Scarlett had recently been diagnosed with flu, which again, I suppose she's talked about the other one dying and has kind of got her head around the fact that the doctors had believed that there was some potential infection and maybe she's trying to create that ruse, but Warwickshire police are immediately suspicious and they launch an investigation, and they do that for a very simple reason. They absolutely think that there is foul play involved, and instantly they have one suspect. They're not looking anywhere else. They believe that Louise Porton is guilty of being involved in her children's deaths. And the police believe that Scarlett had actually died because Louise Porton had deliberately obstructed the airway in her neck. So the reason for that is that Scarlett's neck showed some clear signs of compression, and also there was recent bleeding in her neck tissue. Also there were traces of blood that were found on her pillow. So this indicates that Scarlett could also potentially have been smothered. When they did the post-mortem, they also were able to uncover signs of previous attempts to obstruct Scarlett's airways. So this wasn't the first time. When they looked at the injuries on Lexi, the problem was initially, remember, that they didn't have very obvious signs. But even though there weren't as obvious signs, they do realise that it seems that both girls have suffered a similar fate. It's highly unlikely, incredulous even, to believe that 2 very healthy siblings have suddenly died of natural causes within 3 weeks of each other. And so the alarm bells are absolutely howling now, and they believe that they've got the person who is banged to rights for this crime. Now, Porton's mother, Sharon Porton, she later claimed, this is after Lexi's death, that Porton had told her Scarlett would be next. And she actually said that she sounded threatening. Now, I'm sure for Porton's mother, that's a reflective experience. So hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? Simple as that. You hear something in the moment, you think threatening, but actually it's in the context of somebody's just lost a child. Maybe she's saying that she's worried about losing another child, and that would be a normal fear. She's probably just put it down to that. But on reflection, she's thinking, well, actually, was it said with malice? So I think for Sharon Porton, she probably would be very upset with herself for not acting on that feeling that there was something sinister about the way that Louise Porton was speaking. But it's not how our brain works. You don't sit there thinking, yeah, my daughter's probably going to kill her kids. And without a shadow of a doubt, if Sharon Porton had realised that those children were in danger, she would have done something about it. When the police start analysing Louise Porton's computers as well, it's red flags everywhere, because the searches corroborate exactly what the police are suspecting. They find that the kids' deaths have been planned. In both of the occasions that she'd actually taken Lexi to the hospital, this is in early January 2018, when she's claiming that she's had a fit, she'd literally made internet searches beforehand about why a young child might stop breathing. I mean, why would you search that? Police also found loads of other concerning internet searches. These would all be used as evidence at the trial. So she hasn't been sophisticated as far as forensic goes, but bear in mind, this is a woman with no empathy and no compassion. She's quite arrogant. She's got away with stealing before. She probably thinks that she just needs to be able to look the part and she'll get away with this. She was searching on the internet for websites that had information about how long you could leave somebody to a point where resuscitation wouldn't be effective, and also how long does it take for a body to go cold. Her mobile phone records, so think about the fact that we're talking about her planning and executing the death of her child. Her mobile phones actually show that she's sending a text to a man in which she claims that she's been told by doctors Lexi's gonna die. So the police actually believe that Porton had murdered Lexi in the early hours of the 15th of January 2018. But then, as her searches on the internet seem to indicate, she'd purposely waited until Lexi was basically just beyond saving and then calls the emergency services, because the whole premise of this is she does not want the paramedics to resuscitate her child again. This is why, when they arrive, Lexi's been dead for some time, because she's orchestrated that. So at this point, clearly, she's in a scenario where she feels that she's got away with it. But when Scarlett dies, clearly, all eyes are on what's happened. As with Lexi, Porton this time has made sure that Scarlett doesn't get any help, because she doesn't let emergency services know until Scarlett is well and truly beyond saving. They also get CCTV footage from a petrol station because Louise Porton stopped to get fuel. I mean, why would you do that if you were in some kind of panic about your daughter who might die? You would not do that. And if you were stopping to get fuel because you were going to run out, you'd be hysterical, wouldn't you, and screaming for help. But that's not the case. And they're able to establish, to be fair, that at the point where they've got her on CCTV at the petrol station, Scarlett would already have been dead in that child seat. In fact, the truth is that the police said that they fully expected that Scarlett was dead when Porton carried her from her hotel to the car. Now, in the months following her daughter's deaths, another thing that Louise Porton does is she starts trying to sell their clothing, and again, that in itself, she's just posting pictures of them in bin bags on the swap, sell, buy things in Rugby on the Facebook page there. And she just states on that, you know, there are clothes for girls aged 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12 months, and she was selling them for 20 quid. Also said that she could deliver. And if that doesn't get worse, the faux grief gets me even more, because on the 24th of November 2018, she actually posted tribute to her daughters on, you know, the classic, the place that's really intimate, you know, the place where you're most supported and most cared. Social media, she's on social media. It read, "Mommy's angels, taken from me so soon, you will never be forgotten, R.I.P. This does not compute. But you know, she's putting it out there, isn't she? Investigation was still strongly continuing, and in January 2019, the police charged Louise Porton with Lexi and Scarlett's murders. Of course they do. I hope you're all cheering at home right now. Now, immediately she denies any ill treatment even. Forget murder, and she actually tells the police, "Why would I kill my own kids? My children were never any inconvenience to me, and I accommodated my lifestyle and personal life around them. It is correct that life as a single mother was financially difficult, but I never asked anyone for money. And any suggestions that I used my daughter's ill health or death to make any money is wholly inaccurate and wrong. The media understandably blow up about this case. Because this is two little girls who have been murdered. Of course they blow up. Of course they are devastated. Because we can't believe that anyone would do anything so reprehensible to their children. So they start portraying Porton as a woman who has killed her kids for one reason. And the one reason, as far as they're concerned, is they got in the way of a lifestyle. Simple as that. I don't think that the evidence supports it. I really don't. I don't think the evidence supports this contention at all. Because she had absolutely been indulging in the lifestyle that she'd wanted. She'd had these two children. It hadn't stopped her at all. She was completely egocentric, completely selfish, self-absorbed. It didn't bother her, the impacts of her lifestyle on her kids. She was quite able to continue doing what she was doing. So it's not enough to imagine that they just got in the way. Now, on the 26th of January 2019, Porton stands in court and pleads not guilty to the two charges of murder. So the trial begins June 2019, and the trial begins at Birmingham Crown Court. At this point, they obviously bring in witnesses, and during the trial, Porton's sister gives evidence on her behalf. And she does tell the jury and the court that Porton did love her children. All the witnesses, they gave a similar account. They said that Lexi and Scarlett were happy, they were well looked after, and they obviously weren't overly concerned about Louise Porton. They didn't think that she had this potential, without a doubt. Sadly though, when they looked at the post-mortems on both of the children, they told a different story, basically. So the prosecution, they claim that Louise Porton killed her daughters because they got in the way of what she was doing, what she wanted, who she wanted to be with, and so on and so forth. And they present all the evidence, including text messages from her sister, because her sister Karen actually accuses Louise Porton of leaving her children to have sex with a man in his van. And in another text message, which is very incriminating, Karen says, "So will you just leave them to go f lads?" Furthermore, of course, the doctors, well, they couldn't find any natural reason as to why either, let alone both of the children should have died. And in fact, 2 days before Scarlett's death, a social worker had actually seen her and said that the child was chatty, alert, and happy. Now, Porton, as you will imagine, continues to claim that she's innocent. She maintains absolutely that she was not responsible for her children's death. She claims that the internet searches had got nothing to do with their deaths either. Nothing to do. Nothing to do. It's a mere coincidence. Now, when it comes to actually evaluating this, the jury struggle. They are perplexed. The police are also perplexed as to why Louise Porton has gone ahead and killed her children. So they go ahead and request details of any potential medical conditions that Louise Porton was suffering from, because they're looking at breadcrumbs, so to speak, that can add up to describe what on earth has played out here, what her actions have become, how, why. What is the reasoning behind that? But when they investigated, they found that there was no evidence that she had any medical condition or that she had a mental disorder that could explain her behaviour. There is something very unusual about the fact that this woman doesn't seem to have any paradigm or problems where her mental health is concerned, or prior actions that would make you assume that there was a problem. This is perplexing, and because of that, they are struggling with understanding it per se. On the 1st of August 2019, this is after a 4-week trial, jury of 10 men and 2 women. They take just 6 hours to find Louise Porton guilty of murdering her 2 young daughters, which I think we would all agree was the right decision, because there is no other direction that this could go. In considering the sentence, Judge Mrs. Justice Yip, well, she concluded that a mental disorder was not a feature in the case. And surprisingly as well, aside from a caution for wasting police time when she was 15, Louise Porton had got no previous criminal convictions. However, in spite of that, there were still massively aggravating factors in this case. I mean, first and foremost, this is a mother who has killed her children. I mean, that's got to be the biggest breach of trust imaginable. You know, two young, vulnerable, trusting, loving children being murdered by their parent. The very person that's going to protect them, love them, keep them safe. And instead, they had callously, willingly, cunningly, calculatingly killed them. The judge stated this: these were blameless young children who were plainly vulnerable and ought to have been able to rely on their mother to protect and nurture them. Instead, you took their young lives away. So when it came to sentencing, this was on the 2nd of August 2019, the judge ultimately sentenced Louise Porton to 2 life sentences. So it was not an easy sentence whatsoever, a minimum term of 32 years. That means she will serve 32 years minimum. These were premeditated murders for which she has shown no remorse. And the length of this sentence reflects this. Now, in September 2019, this is more than a year and a half after they died, Lexi and Scarlett were finally buried in the West Midlands, yet after a year and a half after they died. It's awful for families when they have to do that. There has to be a wait because of the trial, etc. Now, their father actually arranged the funeral because he was determined in that last action to let those girls know that they were loved. He wanted to give them a really good send-off, so the girls were taken to their final resting place in a white horse-drawn carriage, which is utterly heartbreaking, isn't it? The fact that those little girls got to go in that princess carriage, but only in their final moments before they were laid to rest. Also, tragically, in February 2020, Porton's own mother, that's 48-year-old Sharon Porton, she's found dead in a home in Willenhall, and it's believed that the reason she took an overdose is because she just was absolutely haunted. She was absolutely devastated and riddled with pain by the fact that her daughter had committed this crime, and of course that she'd lost those gorgeous little girls. Louise Porton is a very, very rare kind of human. I think she's probably one of those individuals that most of us would believe was born that way, because it seems that every single trait that we would anticipate a mother would have, she lacked. And not just lacked, she had the exact opposite. Callousness, cruelty, neglect, complete egocentricity and selfishness. And because of that, 2 perfect little children lost their lives before they even had a chance to begin living them. I hope you feel that we have done those gorgeous little girls some justice in telling this story, and I hope that Louise Porton spends the rest of her life in prison, because I don't think people like her can ever benefit society. I really don't. Let's dedicate this video to those 2 little beauties, Lexi and Scarlett. They deserve so much more, and at least we'll remember their faces. At least we'll remember their value, and at least we will make sure that we hold their images close, because we know what it's like to feel that children have infinite meaning and deserve infinite love. Take care, guys.